Welcome back. From federal cuts to budget battles behind the scenes, our roundtable has an inside look at our state's financial picture and how it affects you. Talmadge Heflin from the conservative think tank Texas Public Policy Foundation. Ava DeLuna Castro is here from the liberal policy group Center for Public Policy Priorities. And Bob Garrett joins us from the Dallas Morning News. Welcome, everyone.
Howdy.
Hi.
All right, so we've got the big word sequestration. What is this? But finally, it's here. Federal cuts across the board going into effect. How's this going to affect Texas? We keep hearing a lot about what it's going to do to education. What do you think, Mr. Heflin?
When you look at all education funding, it's about $50 billion a year. When you federal, state, local, and what are you looking at? Less than $400 million, even if you took the high side. In my opinion, there's going to be no effect.
What do you think?
There are some jobs associated with that. The estimates vary, but the money we're talking about is No Child Left Behind, special education. That second one is the one legislators are concerned with. If we do have to provide services to kids that need special ed, if that's no longer being funded with federal dollars, is that a state responsibility or local property taxes? So that's what the legislators are trying to figure out right now.
Bob, your paper actually reported that it would be around $67.8 million cut from education, 930 teacher jobs, aide jobs. What do you think?
Well, those I think are based on White House estimates of what's happening in every one of the 50 states, and you know, this is across the board, but it's only in certain areas, not the big entitlements like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So it cuts disproportionately, in a sense, on the discretionary spending side. These programs like, I think, the Title I program for underprivileged kids in public schools, that's where a lot of the cut is. And within the state, it varies geographically, because like Fort Hood, it's 6,000 civilians that are going to be furloughed 1 day a week. If you go up 200 miles north to Collin County, north of Dallas, the county judge, Keith Self, said we can handle this ourselves, no problem. And that is a reflection of the fact that, you know, Fort Hood, Fort Bliss and El Paso, Lackland and San Antonio, those are places where the immediate community will feel some of this.
You know, we had the subcommittee from the appropriations this week talking about you know, these federal cuts and what would happen. It seems like some of the federal cuts still have federal mandates that will exist even though the federal funding is not going to be there. So how are we going to pay for those things?
Well, I think the state will step up where they're absolutely necessary. You know, every time you make cuts, especially across the board like this, they take the worst case scenario. State parks, when you cut parks and wildlife, state parks have to close. They rarely ever close. The local and the state will pick up those critical areas, and I think Texas will be just fine.
Should we look at these federal mandates, though, maybe getting rid of some of them or altering them at least a little bit?
I think one issue is there are areas where we have federal dollars and we do not have any state or local dollars supporting that. So nutrition is a good example. The WIC program takes some serious cuts under sequestration. Other programs won't feel those cuts, so school meals, for example. So 100% of those benefits are federally funded, and that's where people will still, this is the issue, the need still exists. People still need to be able to buy food, and they don't have enough money, even if they're working. So if there is no other place to go to, food pantries, for example, can fill in temporarily, but the bigger support that the SNAP program provides, not just to families, but to the grocery stores that they spend those dollars at, there are just some things that are 100% federally funded, and that's where we're concerned that the state won't step in and make up for that loss.
So SNAP is food stamps, and WIC is women, infants, and children. And the difference between them, I'm not sure, but you'll, I'm sure, tell me.
Yes, I mean, SNAP is billions of dollars. You have to be at about 130% of poverty or below. WIC helps a lot more women who are pregnant and their babies and just get access to nutritious things. So again, nutrition programs, if it weren't for federal support, that wouldn't be provided in Texas. It's something, again, charity will provide it, food pantries, but they can only do so much for a certain amount of time, and then what?
One of the things, we also saw this week was with education. The Senate Finance Committee has said that it wants to put $1.4 billion back into the education budget. Do you feel like this is something that once it gets to the Senate and then over to the House side is actually going to happen, Bob?
Oh, I think something in that general vicinity. It was $1.5 billion, I believe, in Senate Finance. In the House, they're talking quietly, a bipartisan group, about putting some money back into schools. But the cut last time was $4 billion out of the main formula aid program to the schools, and then $1.3 billion in these TEA, Texas Education Agency grants for technology and student remedial help and teacher merit pay, and some of those grants may be put back, but there seems to be pretty strong resistance to spending the money available, whether it's in general revenue, money on hand, the $8.8 billion we've been talking about, or in the rainy day fund. There's resistance to dipping into that to undo all the school cuts from last time.
The school groups still say this is a good first step.
Right, and I think the grants that Bob was talking about, I think will be restored. They're looking at that. There was an early conversation about saving at least $2.5 billion until after the courts have their say and hear from the Supreme Court. I think that's probably a wise thing to do. I'm not sure that $1.5 billion the Senate's talking about will survive, but we'll see.
Your group has a different look at all this.
Well, I think we don't need to wait on the courts to undo some of the damage that was done. That's our position. The cuts to the formulas and the cuts to the grants really there are some serious immediate implications that we see. Overcrowded classrooms, like triple the number of waivers, I think, was reported in the Dallas Morning News. 25,000 jobs lost in schools just in the first year of the cuts. That's why we have the overcrowded classrooms, fewer teachers. So the longer that goes on, we do understand we need to know specifically what the court is finally going to say after the appeals, but there are children in our classrooms every day that aren't getting the education they could get. So whatever we can do now with the money that's available, maybe tweak it later once we know for sure what the courts might require, but why are we waiting to undo the damage? The money is there, and every day that goes by means that our students aren't being prepared for the tests and just to be better, more productive workers in the future.
Because it's very likely that the Texas Supreme Court will uphold that court decision from before, correct?
We'll see. We don't know that. It's hard to outguess the Supreme Court. We'll see what they'll do this time.
This is like the 6th round, isn't it, Talmadge? So, five previous ones all went against the state, but, these justices are a different group than have ruled before. They're all many of them are Rick Perry appointees who then won election in their own stead. So I'm not sure we can say this is a more conservative court, certainly, than the one that ruled back in, 2005? I think so.
Yeah. Speaking of Rick Perry, another thing that has come up this week, the texting while driving bill is back. It was passed by the legislature to ban texting while driving statewide last session, but then Governor Perry vetoed it in the final hours of everything passing to go to law. Do you think that the same thing is going to happen this year?
I can't outguess the governor. I'll be surprised if the legislature doesn't pass it, simply because it's rehashing issues that have been dealt with before. But we'll have to wait and see what the governor does with it.
What do you think?
I think one thing, whether it's specific policy changes like the texting while driving or budget issues, one thing that maybe we're not seeing this session is the legislature. A lot of them are brand new. We have a lot of freshmen in the House and Senate. So they're understanding that in Texas, it's a legislative process. Other states, the governor writes the budget, but here, the House and Senate come up with budgets. They work out the differences, and I think here there's been a little more deference to the governor because maybe people don't understand. No, it's the legislature's responsibility, and I think it's because they're closer to their constituents. They each represent House and Senate districts, so I think it might take a while. Maybe 2015 is when we'll see a little more understanding of just what they could do if they want to, and if there's the votes. But I think right now people are stepping back maybe on both budget and policy issues.
Great discussion. Thank you for joining us. And coming up on In Session In Depth.
That sounds silly. Greg and I share an apartment here in Austin. Well, we haven't lived in the same house together in a long, long time.
Brothers in lawmaking. Their parents must have raised them right. Now these siblings are serving in a state capitol when In Session In Depth returns.